Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today is my kind of February wrap-up. So these are all the books that I read in February, what I wasn't able to finish but I'm working on, and then I'll talk a little bit about what I'm going to be reading next month as well. So yeah, without further ado, here's my kind of month in review for February. So, this was a slower month for me than January. January I read 7 books. I think it was 4 fiction, 3 nonfiction. So this month was, a bit slower. I only got through 4 books. I was trying to get through 7 as well, and I'm in the middle of books 5, 6, and 7 right now, but I only completed 4 books. What's more is that in a previous video, I talked about how I have kind of given myself a syllabus or a kind of stricter reading list to do kind of between the start of January and the end of April. And to get through that, it's kind of on average about 4 books a month from that list specifically, not including, other things I'm reading. So unfortunately from that list, I also only got through 1 book this month. And the other books were kind of surprise reads that just kind of got added along the way. So to start out, that first book that was on that list of kind of fantasy and science fiction books that I'm trying to get through from January to April, that was Ship of Magic by Robin Hobb. So this is the first book in the Live Ship Traders trilogy, which itself is the second trilogy in the kind of larger realm of the Elderling series. Technically, the first book in the series is Assassin's Apprentice, which is the first book of the what's it called? I forget the name of the series. But yeah, that's the first book, Assassin's Apprentice, and that trilogy. And I just, apparently you can kind of start in either place, and I thought this was a bit more interesting of a starting place for me, because this one is all about pirates. There's kind of weird magical serpents, and yeah, it just sounded a bit more kind of my vibe right now. I don't know, it's a pretty short, like, physical book, so I was kind of deceived. It was a lot longer than I thought. It's about 800 pages, and I really ended up liking it, but admittedly the first 500 pages or so were pretty slow. They weren't bad, but they were pretty slow. There was less emphasis on plot than I'm used to and a lot more emphasis on character. So the characters were great. You loved them, you hated them when you needed to. So yeah, this was a really good book, and I am gonna pick up the sequel, which I think is Mad Ship. I'm not in any particular rush to do so. I really wanted to get through this first one, and now I think I'll kind of pause with the series a bit, but I am excited to continue eventually. Okay, and then that was the only book from that kind of big master list I'm trying to work through, and all 3 of the other books kind of were surprise or kind of, just jumped up on the schedule. So the first is The 3-Body Problem by, I think it's Zhizhen Liu. I could be pronouncing that wrong. But yeah, so this is kind of, big, epic, hard sci-fi. And I read this with my dad. My dad and I kind of book clubbed this book. Yeah, I really liked this book. It was the first kind of hard science fiction book I got into in a long time, since probably I read Neal Stephenson's Seven Eves a couple years ago, which is a great book. I really like that book. So yeah, this was very good. Kind of, set against the backdrop of the Cultural Revolution in China. Very kind of physics forward and kind of about physics problems. The title itself is kind of a famous physics problem. And yeah, I mean, it's about an alien civilization, essentially, and early contact with Earth, but I won't go into any more detail than that because it gets pretty spoilery pretty quickly. But I did really like this book. And yeah, I will probably pick up the sequel, which I think is The Dark Forest, in the somewhat near future. Okay, and then the other 2 books I did were kind of purely, I was kind of looking, when I was doing Ship of Magic, it was kind of a slog at times. I did really like the book, but it was kind of a slog at times. So I started looking purposely for pretty light, fun, simple reads, just for enjoyment. And so I picked up, also kind of a new thing for me, but this is Litany of Dreams by Ari Marmel, and this is part of the Arkham Horror series. So this series is kind of, I think it's connected to a series of games as well, but the whole Arkham Horror kind of franchise takes place essentially in a Lovecraftian setting. You know, it's like 1920s Massachusetts, I think. And yeah, it's very Lovecraft in the sense that it's, you know, kind of fantasy horror, very cosmic horror, very existential, very kind of, you know, massive creatures and deities. And yeah, so this was cool. This was kind of a mystery horror, very pulpy. It was fun. It was Lovecraft without all of the really intense racism, which was very good. It doesn't really address that, but it kind of ignores it. So for the type of book I was looking for, I think that was fair. If you are looking for a book, here's my little mini pitch. If you're looking for a book that's very Lovecraftian, but also actively kind of addresses the really negative things in his work, I'd recommend The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin. I might do a review for this book, actually. This was one of the first books I read this year in 2022, and I loved it. And it's very much kind of Lovecraftian deities and monsters, but it very much like engages with, you know, his racist worldview and kind of incorporates that into the story in a really interesting kind of updated way. So I really recommend this book if you're into kind of Lovecraftian stuff. So that was Litany of Dreams, and the last book I finished was Light of the Jedi by Charles Soule. So this is the first book in this kind of the High Republic trilogy. I think it's actually like quite a big multimedia project, the kind of High Republic thing that's going on right now. But I think at its heart is this trilogy of kind of adult sci-fi books. There's some YA books involved, there's some graphic novels involved. I think I'm just going to stick to the trilogy here. But yeah, this was my first Star Wars book I ever read. And I loved this book. I really enjoyed it. It was fast-paced. I've spoken a bit about it in another video. But yeah, fast-paced, energetic, very kind of cool, seeing the Jedi, you know, in their best form as these agents of hope and all these things. So yeah, I really enjoyed this, and I'll definitely be finishing the series. I forget the name of the second book, but I'll be moving on to this pretty soon. So those were the 4 books that I got through this month. My goal was to do 7 books like I did in January, and I'm in the middle of those last 3 books. So these are the books that are kind of in progress that'll bleed into March a little bit. So the first one, this is the only nonfiction I was working through this month, and that's The Ottoman Endgame by Sean McMeekin. Yeah, I really thought I would finish this. I started it right at the beginning of the month. And I won't lie, this has definitely been a bit of a slog for me. I'm just over halfway through, if you can see. Yeah, I just, you know, like this is roughly the time that, you know, my master's and everything is focused on. So it's a history that I know, it's a history that I'm really interested in and I'm trying to learn a bit more about. And specifically, you know, my area of interest started kind of right after the Ottoman Empire. So this is kind of the fall of the Ottoman Empire. But I should have clicked on that it's mainly military history, which is history that I just really struggle to read. I find it really dry and detached and clinical, and I really struggle to get through it. So this is, yeah, this is kind of a miss for me. If you're looking for that thing, if you're into military history, or if you're really looking for kind of, you know, nitty gritty, you know, details about this time period, it's a great book. It's a great resource. But for me, it's definitely a bit of a miss. So I'll either continue to drag through it, or I might just try to push through it in one big sprint, you know, coming up soon. But yeah, so that's the Ottoman Endgame. And then the other kind of big book from that, you know, kind of reading list I've given myself, like Ship of Magic, that I was trying to get through this month, and I did not, is Dreams of the Dying by Nicholas Lietzow. So as you can see, I'm unfortunately only about a third of the way in. Not because it's slow or boring or it's a slog or anything. I'm actually loving this book. I'm really, really enjoying this book. It's just that, you know, Ship of Magic took a while, And I'm kind of enjoying going through this one a little bit slower than I usually do. But yeah, this is an awesome book so far. I'm really excited to continue on with it. It is kind of dark fantasy, like elements of horror. It's essentially about this mercenary who's got, you don't really know what's in his past, but he's very much dealing with PTSD and depression. And he kind of is trying to turn over a new leaf, so he accepts this mysterious invitation for this kind of job on this kind of archipelago kingdom. And yeah, he finds out that the king of that kingdom is in a mysterious coma. And it's all about kind of like nightmares, and he has to kind of traverse into people's nightmares, and it's really cool. But yeah, it's a bit kind of slower than I thought, but not in a bad way. It's very action packed, it's very exciting, it's very, fast paced, but it's quite, heavy on themes of depression and things like that. So I'm enjoying taking my time with this, but I'm really enjoying this book. And then the last book I'm working on, like Litany of Dreams or Light of the Jedi, was another kind of light book to try to kind of, just for the enjoyment while I'm working through some of these bigger books. And so that is Mort by Terry Pratchett. So this is my first Discworld novel. For those of you who don't know, Terry Pratchett wrote a series of books called The Discworld, which is, I think, 41 books long. It's massive. Now, most of the books are really small. Like, this is only about 250, maybe 300 pages. But yeah, they're all kind of comedic, satirical, kind of, fantasy adventures. Within the 41 books, you don't really have to read them in order. There's different kind of sub-series. So this book, Mort, is the first of kind of the sub-series following the character of Death. There's other, like, one of the probably the most famous sub-series is the City Watch, which I think starts with the book Guards. But yeah, so this is really nice. This book follows a young guy called Mort, who's kind of hapless and useless, and kind of no one will hire him. And then he is contacted by Death, literally, Grim Reaper, skeleton, black holes for eyes type thing, and Death hires him to be his apprentice. And yeah, so it's really funny, like, it's very funny, and witty and kind of very absurd, but it's also quite, like, I don't know, it's quite nice. It's not just for jokes. It's actually like a really tender look at death and someone trying to come to terms with death. So I'm really enjoying this book, and I'll probably do more Terry Pratchett somewhat soon. So those were the 4 books that I read in February, and 3 books that I was trying to read and I'm still in the middle of. So I will hopefully finish those pretty early on in March. And then, yeah, like I said, I'm working through that big list of 16 or 17 fantasy books. Ship of Magic and Dreams of the Dying, are on them. And yeah, so I don't really have an order of how I'm going to read those. I just know those are the books I want to get through, and I'll kind of pick and choose, as I go through what I'm feeling in the moment. So I don't really have a set list for March, but I know 2 of the books I want to get to in March are The Dragon Republic by R.F. Kuang. So this is the second book in the Poppy War trilogy, which is, a trilogy I'm really excited about. I finished and really liked the first Poppy War book. I highly recommend it, but I also really recommend you look up things like trigger warnings and content warnings if you do want to read it, because it is really violent and very kind of disturbing at times. But what I like about this series is that it's the type of fantasy that I actually want to write myself, because it's very much, it's not in our world, but it's very clear that it's talking about real world history. It's very clear that it's talking about early and mid 20th century Chinese history, so it's talking about the Second Sino-Japanese War, it's talking about World War II, it's talking about the kind of, the rise of communism in China. So I'm really excited for this series as a whole. It's very brutal, so enjoyable isn't the right word necessarily, but I am really, I'm really admiring and liking these books. So I'm excited to move on to the second book, and then I'll probably do the third book, the Burning God, probably in April. And then the other book I know that I want to get to in March is The Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne. This is the first of the Bloodsworn saga. So I haven't read anything by John Gwynne yet. This will be my first. I think he's got the Faithful and the Fallen series. And then there's a sequel series to that, and I forget its name. But yeah, nothing against those books or him as an author, but I've just never really had that much interest before. And then this book, I don't know, this book sounds cool. It's still, I think, like those books. It's still kind of Viking inspired. But yeah, it sounds really cool. It sounds very kind of fun, action-packed. You know, apparently he's very good with kind of character writing, with kind of, you know, action. So I'm excited for this. And the second book, I think The Hunger of the Gods, comes out this year as well. So it's kind of nice to kind of get into a series near the beginning. So yeah, so that's my kind of February wrap up and a little bit of projection into March. I'm sure I'll read more in March. It's a little bit longer of a month, but yeah, so that's kind of, you know, my wrap up. Thanks for checking in, guys. Let me know if you've read any of these books, and yeah, I'll be out with another video soon.